One of the problems that people are challenging and talking about today is the problem or the big question of suffering. What is it all about? How can a God of love allow suffering in the world today? And we are experiencing that with the current virus. And over the years, I think the world globally has experienced various challenges, you could say, or events of suffering to people. We're experiencing one now. Nationally in this country, we've experienced them. Football disasters way back Hillsborough in 1989. And the Aberfan disaster, of that coal disaster in Wales, where many adults and children were killed. 1966 that was. And people individually are experiencing suffering, loss, personally in their family, actually day by day. And it's on these occasions that people ask you questions about, where is God in this? A God of love. Is he allowing it? Where is God? Has God disappeared? Is he still there? And one thing we do have to realize is simply this. The world in which we live is not the world that God intended. God did not intend suffering in the world. He created a perfect world. So what has happened? How has it all happened? Where's the answer to this question? Well, when we read in the Bible, we actually read in Genesis 1 at the very beginning in the creation story that God created a perfect world. And everything he did was perfect. And in Genesis 1 we read at each stage that God saw that it was good. That is a perfect God saying it's a perfect world. And as we day by day go through that, we live in a perfect world. And man walked with God, which is wonderful. And that's the intention. God created man perfectly that he might have a living daily relationship with him. That's how God intended. That was God's plan and purpose in the very beginning. So what happened? Well, one of the greatest gifts I think God gave man was this. In the beginning was free will. That God was not a God who is a controller God. He's a creator God who wants a relationship. And he didn't control that. He didn't pre-program us or compel us in our behavior. He actually gave us free will. And free will is what is happening not just from the beginning and all the way through until now and even today. Man is exercising his free will from God. A man chose to use his free will in the beginning. And in the story way back in Genesis 3, we actually read that God, gave man this free will, and man exercised his free will and actually rebelled against God. He disobeyed God and didn't do what God wanted to in the very beginning. And first man and first woman actually rebelled against what God had said. They went their own way and rebelled against God. And sin entered the world because of that rebellion, because of that sin. And a result of that, sin entered the world. In Romans 5 we actually read, by one man, death by sin. Death and sin came into the world. And from all of that, it's affected all people, all generations, even up to now. And that is why we live in a sinful, corrupt world, a distorted world of what God had created, a rebellious world. And we see it day by day. And in chapter 3 of Genesis, we actually read that man and God were actually separated. There was a gap between man and there was a gap between God because of the sin of man that he created in the beginning. In chapter 4 of Genesis, we find the first murder, where Cain killed Abel. And then even in chapter 6, we have the wickedness was so rife within the world, within people's behavior, that God decided that he was going to wipe out mankind. And we have the story of Noah and the flood. That's chapter 6. You see, we use the term the fall of what happened. It was the act of disobedience and defiance against God. And we call that the fall. That day, way back with Adam and Eve, we read about in Genesis. And the gap that now separates us from a living God, a holy and a righteous God. And so we live in a corrupted world, not as God created it in the beginning. And the result of that problem of sin in the world is suffering. Man's greed, man's selfishness, man's self-centeredness, man's wickedness is all because of that. That sin and our sinful nature. Man naturally is rebellious against God. Man has a naturally sinful nature. You and I are the same. And we rebel against God and go our own way. And the result is suffering in the world. It's the core problem of the world today, is rebellion and defiance towards God. We live in a suffering world from the beginning, the results of the fall. But God is a God of grace. Although there is sickness and though there is suffering, although there is disasters round about us in the world today, God is a God of love and grace and mercy. And he is continuing reaching out towards mankind. Right the way through the Old Testament, God is reaching out to his people for a living relationship. But we read in 1 Corinthians 15, death came through one man, and that was Adam. But now through Jesus Christ, there is a way where God can have that relationship with man. You see, Jesus came into the world to preach good news to the poor. He came into the world to bring freedom to the captives, to prisoners, to those, to bring recovery to the sick and release to those who are oppressed. But he also came to bring forgiveness, new life, and hope. You see, how through all of this suffering, how does God understand and know about suffering? You see, God knows simply because he sent his only Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, into a suffering world. And Jesus Christ, God's only Son, was rejected by man. He was despised. He was hung upon a cross. He suffered for the sin of the world, for your sin and for my sin. But he suffered for the problem of suffering in the world. You see, he experienced that suffering in his life. So why do we suffer? We suffer because of the fall. The gap that made our sinful man, sinful disobedience between man and God. We are all sinful by nature. We all live rebellious, corrupted lives. And that is because our free will has turned us away from God. But God is a God of love. He sent his Son Jesus to bring us back into the relationship that he intended in the very beginning. Jesus suffered in a way that none of us will ever suffer. He suffered by taking upon himself our sin, the sin of the world, becoming sin for us. And by his death and resurrection, there is hope. There's new life for each one of us. You see, when Jesus walked on this earth, he was troubled. The heart of God through Jesus, his Son, was troubled when he saw the results of sin round about him. He saw corruption. He saw sickness. He saw fear. He saw wickedness. And he saw death. All the results of sinfulness and rebellion against God. You see, the heart of God reached out to a lost people in the Lord Jesus Christ. And the heart of God reaches out today to those round about us and to us in our lives day by day. You see, we all suffer from the results of sin. Everyone in this country, I would say even now, is suffering somehow or knows of somebody suffering. Maybe even you do in your family and your experience. But we have a hope. Our hope is in the Lord Jesus Christ. He is God's way of salvation to bring us new life, to bring us back to that relationship that he actually intended in the beginning. And that is what the church is here for. We bring God's love and God's grace into other people's lives round about us. We introduce them to the Lord Jesus Christ and show the way that they too in their lives can know forgiveness and new life and have a hope. But you know, the most wonderful thing about our hope, it's not just for today. We look forward day by day for a living hope in the Lord Jesus Christ. We look forward to the day when Jesus is returning He's coming back to take those of us who know and love him to be with him forever in that perfect place that he's preparing for us right now. You see, because of sin and death, that's all been taken away in Jesus. He overcame sin and death through his resurrection and new life. And we can, through his resurrection, have new life. We, through his resurrection, can have forgiveness of sin because of his death on the cross. And we, day by day, can experience overcoming, even through suffering. Our hope is in the Lord Jesus Christ. And we look forward to that day. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. Did you know that? There's no band-aid job going to happen on this earth. The whole of the earth is corrupt as well and is groaning, we read in the book of Revelation. But we look forward with hope to see one day the Lord Jesus Christ and be with him. So the problem of suffering, does God care? Yes. He is concerned. He cares about us, his people, and the world. He cared enough to give his son. And people say, well, show us, where is God's love at this time? Well, we just need to point to the cross and show that's God's love through the suffering of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we can experience and know him in our lives. The problem of sin and suffering, yes, it's rebellion way back in the beginning. But we can experience his love and grace day by day.